Good morning. It's Monday the 8th of January here in London. This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, more than 100 Boeing jets are taken out of service after a section of a 737 MAX 9 plane blows off.
US congressional leaders announce a deal on government spending worth almost $1.6 trillion.
Plus, why the transition to electric vehicles is threatening Europe's car-making powerhouses.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
Boeing 737 MAX 9 planes are being grounded across the globe after an accident caused a gaping hole in a brand new craft operated by Alaska Airlines at 16,000 feet. This was the moment the pilot declared an emergency landing.
We just depressurized. It's set to maintain 10,000 and we need to return back to Portland.
Alaska 1282, did you declare an emergency or just need to return to?
Yes, we are emergency. We are depressurized. We do need to return back to. We have 177 passengers. Fuel is 18.8.
Now, more than 170 planes are out of action while an investigation looks into the cause. Jennifer Homendy, the head of America's National Transportation Safety Board, is leading the inquiry.
We are very, very fortunate here that this didn't end up in something more tragic. No one was seated in 26A and B, where that door plug is. The aircraft was around 16,000 feet and only 10 minutes out from the airport when the door blew.
As Homendy notes, nobody was seriously injured in the Alaska Airlines incident. The grounding, though, is a major setback for Boeing's CEO Dave Calhoun as he tries to stabilise the company in the wake of manufacturing defects and costly repairs in recent years.
Now to US politics. The US Congress has announced a deal on spending for the current fiscal year. The proposed $1.59 trillion cap makes a US government shutdown less likely when deadlines approach later this month. But the bipartisan agreement could still be blocked as lawmakers debate how to allocate those funds.
Days of travel chaos in London have been avoided after industrial action on the tube was called off at the last minute. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo has the details.
The strike on the London's Underground, threatened for the first full working week of 2024, is off. This after RMT Union made last-minute progress in its discussions with Transport for London on Sunday. The dispute is over pay, with the union demanding more than the 5% pay increase offered by TfL. According to RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch, more funding for a deal has now been made available and negotiations can, quote, take place on an improved basis. London's Mayor Sadiq Khan welcomed the news, saying it shows what can be achieved through engagement with trade unions in a post on X. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
Elon Musk's drug use is worrying executives at Tesla and SpaceX, according to a Wall Street Journal report. The article cites unidentified people familiar with the matter, saying the billionaire has used LSD, cocaine and ecstasy often. The news comes after Bloomberg reported in 2019 that the Pentagon reviewed the federal security clearance tied to Musk's role as CEO of Space Exploration Technologies after he smoked marijuana during a 2018 podcast appearance. Alex Spiro, an attorney for the billionaire, told the Journal that his client is regularly and randomly drug tested at SpaceX and has never failed a test. Musk did not respond to a request for comment from Bloomberg News.
The US Secretary of State has warned that the Israel-Hamas war could, quote, easily become a wider conflict on his fourth Middle East trip since the war broke out. Speaking during a news conference in Doha, Antony Blinken said the region is facing a moment of profound tension. Aid remains a focus for the US diplomat, who added there is a lack of basic provision for civilians in Gaza.
Too many Palestinian civilians are suffering from insufficient access to food, to water, to medicine, to other essential supplies. Children, most of all. We continue to raise with Israel the need to do everything possible to facilitate the provision of humanitarian aid to Gaza, and I will do so again when I'm there later this week.
That's Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State. Qatar's Prime Minister, speaking alongside Blinken, called for a broader ceasefire that would end the violence.
China has detained the head of an overseas consulting firm, saying that they are a British spy. The Ministry of State's securities official WeChat account said that the alleged spy provided the UK with state secrets and intelligence. Bloomberg has learned that a recent purge of top military leaders was an attempt by President Xi to prepare armed forces for combat. Eurasia Group's China Managing Director Rick Waters says that might actually be a positive.
China's lack of military readiness kind of underscores a key point here. I don't think we're on the verge of a fire with Taiwan. I think it's just more of what Beijing has been doing for a while now.
For Waters, he expects coercion and soft power to be China's tools in engaging with Taiwan. In another sign of the country's heightened focus on national security, China also issued fresh sanctions on 5 US defence industry companies. Now, in a moment, we'll be getting the latest on the investigation into that mid-air incident aboard a Boeing airplane. Pretty terrifying for the passengers on board. Fortunately, nobody injured, but obviously this leading to, well, an enormous event really for Boeing and for plane, for aircraft carriers, for airlines around the world. We'll talk about that story in a moment. But something else that caught our eye today.
Yeah, this is a survey by Bloomberg Intelligence finding that workers in Hong Kong say they'd need a 6% pay rise to give up hybrid working arrangements. This is part of a survey carried out that also looks at what that might mean for the commercial real estate sector, and particularly in terms of rents. Bloomberg Intelligence saying that it could lead to rents falling by about 6% in 2024. Hong Kong at the moment has a record over 16% of office space is vacant at the end of last year. So that's according to CBRE. This has resonance, of course, for workers elsewhere as well. Here in London, for example, a December survey from BI said that London's employers may need to return some form of working from home or pay staff more because of the battle for talent. An amazing 3/4 of employees surveyed by Bloomberg Intelligence said they either change jobs to secure flexible working or ask for a pay rise. So this is still something very high on workers' agendas as we consider how that might affect the broader commercial real estate market as well.
It's still very bullish, isn't it, from employees? I suppose given the high employment rate in the UK, perhaps, the power that employees have is there. OK, interesting stories then on the Bloomberg terminal.
Let's turn to the latest from the Middle East now and the US Secretary of State's tour of the region. Anthony Blinken says the war in Gaza could easily spill over into a full-blown regional conflict amid warnings from Israel that it could escalate its conflict with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Our AMEA News Director Rosalind Masson joins us with the latest now. Ros, good morning. Anthony Blinken trying to contain the rising tensions across the Middle East. How serious are the warnings that he's giving?
Well, these are obviously very serious comments from Anthony Blinken on this trip, and he's been echoing the concerns for weeks now that this could yet spill over. That so far has not happened, but it does remain a risk. And he's been taking the temperature around the region on this latest trip. He's been everywhere: Turkey, Qatar, Jordan, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and getting the mood from those places. And also the latest thinking from Israel about how determined Israel is to continue with its war in Gaza. So far, again, that's not spiraled outward. We do have Houthis attacking shipping in the Red Sea, but that's a sort of a lower level activity despite the pickup in it. It's mostly sort of disruption around shipping, causing shipping to divert. We had Hezbollah, again, another Iranian proxy, unleashing rocket attacks from Lebanon into the north of Israel, but still not using its full arsenal despite the rising rhetoric. There's a sense in that, really, that these Iranian proxies at least do appreciate the risk to themselves if it really blows up further. So obviously, with these conflicts, there's the risk of something unintended happening for starters, and that has to remain a concern. But so far, it's not been happening.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms, though, of the latest rhetoric from Israel around escalation with Hezbollah, what do we know about Israeli thinking on this?
Well, we had those comments from the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, saying that Israel is determined to enable residents who live near the border with Lebanon to return to their homes. If we can, we will do that through diplomacy, he said. If not, we'll act in other ways. That's, of course, after the resumption of some of those rockets from Hezbollah into northern Israel, because, of course, they blame Israel for a drone strike on Beirut that killed a senior leader of Hamas. And that was one of the largest rocket attacks from Hezbollah so far, but they're certainly not using their arsenal, which is sort of the high-end missiles and so on. And so you can see there that, Israel is warning Lebanon and really Hezbollah further, but we're not seeing that spiral in the way that some are concerned it would. We're also seeing, of course, increased violence in the West Bank, which is another challenge for the Israelis. We have reports from Iranian media that Israeli forces killed 6 Palestinians in a drone strike there. So you've got sort of 3 fronts in a way for Israel. You've got Gaza, the West Bank, and Lebanon to contend with.
At the same time, the attacks on the ships in the Red Sea are presenting another dilemma for the United States. Thinking about Antony Blinken's tour of the region, what is the likelihood of further intervention from the US on that issue?
Well, we know the US is considering its options there. They've got this coalition to protect shipping, but the attacks are continuing, and major shippers are saying they have to skirt the area, which means significant diversions and delays as a result. And that's adding at least a premium to market pricing for things like oil. And so for the US, the consideration is whether just to continue with that coalition and hope things fade off, or whether they should conduct targeted strikes into Yemen. Or something further, get US troops back on the ground in Yemen, or how to pressure the Houthis really to stand down. And none of those are particularly good options for the US. What they do is risk pushing things into that wider conflagration that they've been warning about, or drawing the US in more militarily than it wants to be right now. So there is the prospect of some sort of further intervention, although none of those options, again, are particularly good for the US.
No, Ros, thank you so much for being with us this morning. That is Bloomberg's EMEA News Director, Rosalind Matheson.
Well, investigations are continuing into an incident on a Boeing 737 MAX 9 plane on Friday, which saw a section of the fuselage blow out during a flight in the United States. Airlines in many parts of the world have withdrawn the model from service pending safety checks. The US Safety Agency has been giving an update on their investigations this morning, saying that a key piece of that Alaska Airlines plane has been discovered. Let's get the latest from our Asia aviation reporter, Danny Lee. Danny, great to have you with us on the programme. What have we heard from the NTSB about this incident involving the Alaska Airlines flight?
So from the US federal safety investigators, the air safety investigators, the latest development in the last hour is that they have found the key missing piece of evidence, the door plug that was blown out of this Alaska Airlines Flight 1282 plane. So it's critical because they can start to glean clues over the coming days of any deformities, any stress in the particular door and around the aircraft, so they can start to build a body of evidence into what exactly happened. But there is still a long way to go for investigators, because they want to look at a whole range of factors, whether it be to do with the door, inside the aircraft, the pressurization system. We also actually heard that this pressurization system actually had, malfunctioned over 3 previous flights. And so Alaska Airlines did take steps to mitigate this, but it was an auto pressurization fail light which had been turning on, had been checked, and so therefore they couldn't find anything Alaska Airlines, so they were able to put the plane back into service.
Okay, so then what has been the response from regulators and airlines to all of this?
So for the regulators, what we did see over the weekend was fairly swift from the US Federal Aviation Administration. They have grounded 171 of 215 Boeing 737 MAX 9 jets. And with other regulators such as from China to making an emergency meeting, you had India also instructing checks. And then into Europe and in the UK, they all noted and accepted what the US FAA has said. Fortunately for all these jurisdictions, they don't operate the MAX 9 jet in their part of the world.
How damaging is all of this for Boeing?
Yeah, for Boeing, this is a reputational issue, once again, because after the global grounding in 2019, which was off the back of 2 fatal crashes, we have seen in the last several months manufacturing and quality control lapses which have impacted Boeing, and that stems from one of its key suppliers in particular, Spirit Aerosystems. And so therefore seeing something like this happening again, and to the point we have actually not heard from Spirit yet since this accident took place. So it'll be really key to hear from the likes of them, the key supplier to Boeing, about potentially their role in all of this, and clearly for Boeing, a lot to think about when it comes to damage limitation and also just the fallout to the reputation.
Absolutely. I mean, the images, so circulating around the world of the damage and the sort of passengers on board. What do you think the next steps might be then that we should be watching out for in this story?
Yeah, for Boeing, it's their communication to the airlines about what they can do to make checks to their aircraft, and clearly that's going to be happening in conjunction with the US FAA, who actually earlier said in the Asia Hours today that the grounding of the 737 MAX 9, they would not allow it to fly again until they know it's absolutely safe. So clearly the regulator in the US has taken a very firm and decisive view, but it's the communication about getting that plane back up in the air, because as long as this plane is on the ground for particularly the airlines like Alaska and United, there will be disruption to flight schedules that will continue to happen for days, maybe weeks to come.
Okay, Danny Lee, our Asia aviation reporter, thank you very much for joining us with the latest on that story this morning.
Yeah, we'll continue to follow that. Now, let's move on and talk about a story here in Europe. The Czech Republic and Slovakia, the former Czechoslovakia, make more cars per capita than anywhere else in the world. But now the transition to electric vehicles is putting a vast supply chain of hundreds of companies across these two countries in jeopardy. Joining us now to discuss from Prague is Bloomberg's senior reporter for economy and government, Andrea Dudic. Thank you so much for being with us. This is a long piece that you've done, Andrea and colleagues. How dependent are these two economies then on car making?
The two economies are hugely dependent on car making. Both Czech Republic and Slovakia have attracted a number of investments into the car industry since the 1990s. The industry now accounts for at least a quarter of exports in both countries. In the case of Slovakia, for as much as 40%. It's been the main driver of foreign investments. Companies such as Volkswagen or Kia have invested billions of euros here and created thousands of jobs here. That trend has continued, and with Volvo now being the company that's building an electric plant in Slovakia.
Andrea, how much is the transition to electric vehicles, I suppose, upsetting that trajectory with the competition coming from other places?
A lot of that is still to be seen, but there are some risks that are already showing. The main concern is coming from the vast network of auto parts makers who are key to the industry. Some have already started to lay off staff, and others have warned that they will not be able to keep all their workers in the years to come. This could put pressure on the jobless rate, especially in regions away from the capital cities. According to one study, in the worst case scenario for Slovakia, as many as 4.5% of jobs in the industry could disappear with the switch to EVs.
So then what are the big automakers saying? I mean, as you mentioned, if they've invested so much.
The automakers seem to be well prepared and way ahead of the game. Volkswagen or Volvo are heavily investing to make this a smooth switch. And for example, the Czech-based Škoda Auto, which is part of Volkswagen Group, plans to invest 5.6 billion euros by 2027. So the worry and the problem is probably more going to come from the parts makers and not the automakers themselves.
How much are the Czech Republic and Slovakia preparing for this transition or adapting to it?
Both countries are trying to prepare as much as they can. The Czech Prime Minister, for example, has made this phenomenon his priority. Both countries are also trying to attract potential investors to build battery plants here, but neither is anywhere near Hungary and Poland, the neighboring countries of Slovakia and the Czech Republic, which have managed to attract a number of battery plants here.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.